Hey everybody, welcome to the What is Money Show. I am thrilled to have you here joining me on my mission to help shine light on the corruption of money. Now, if this is your first time listening to the What is Money Show, I strongly recommend that you go back to episodes 1 through 9 first, which lays a lot of the groundwork for many of the concepts that we explore on the show. These first 9 episodes are my series with Michael Saylor, and thousands of people have told me that this is the best podcast series they've ever heard, hands down, and that it was instrumental to their understanding of money and Bitcoin. So if you're looking to start a deep dive into the nature of money, I don't think there's any place better that you can start other than episode 1 of this show. Now, a little bit about this show and how it makes money. The What is Money Show is 100% sponsor based. So all of our revenues are derived from direct sponsorships. And I strive to be very selective about the sponsors that I work with, specifically only using sponsors that I use personally, and also choosing sponsors that have values which are well aligned to the values expressed on this show, such as freedom, education, self-sovereignty, etc. So what I'm going to do now is a few ad reads right at the top of the show, and then I'll do a few more ad reads in the middle. And I hope you'll take the time to listen to them, as again, these are hand-selected sponsors, and I think you'll like what they have to offer. Today's podcast is brought to you by In Wolf's Clothing. Wolf is the first startup accelerator dedicated exclusively to the Bitcoin Lightning Network. 4 times per year, Wolf brings teams from around the world to New York City to work with like-minded entrepreneurs, pushing the boundaries of what's possible with Bitcoin and Lightning. The program is designed to help early-stage companies achieve product-market fit, develop their brand, secure early-stage funding, and grow businesses that help fuel the global adoption of Bitcoin. So go to wolfnyc.com to learn more about the program or apply. Again, that's WolfNYC, WOLFNYC.com. Wicked, welcome to the What is Money Show.
Hey, Robert. Thanks for having me on.
It's great to have you on. Your longer name is Wicked Smart Bitcoin. And just by way of quick introduction, you are a Bitcoin educator on Twitter or X and YouTube. We'll link to both your Twitter and your YouTube page in the show notes here. And today we're going to be talking about Bitcoin unspent transaction outputs, which is a slightly technical aspect of Bitcoin. These go by the acronym UTXOs. So that is the acronym we'll be using today to refer to unspent transaction outputs. So I think to get started, let's just define that for the audience. Wicked, what is a UTXO?
Sure. So I like to think of UTXOs using an analogy, right, in reference to gold. And so, when you think of gold, it comes in different sized chunks, right? It might come in a big bar, it might come in a small little coin, and maybe you've got a few flakes of it, floating around on your desk or something, right? Bitcoin works in a very similar way. So UTXOs are really just chunks of Bitcoin. And, just like chunks of gold, you can have large UTXOs, right? You can have UTXOs worth a lot of Satoshis, and you can have very small ones, right? The smallest UTXOs are 1 Satoshi. Now, of course, you can't make those small ones anymore. The network wouldn't allow you to do that. But early on, when there wasn't nearly as many constraints, there was a lot of people, just experimenting. And so they made quite a few 1 Satoshi UTXOs, right? One thing that's kind of interesting, the largest UTXO that's ever been made was 500,000 Bitcoin. So that's the largest chunk of Bitcoin ever in the history of Bitcoin. And that was one that was made by Mt. Gox back in 2011, and then it's been split up into smaller ones, right? But yeah, that's basically what UTXO is. It's a chunk of Bitcoin. And just like gold, you can merge UTXOs together, right? You can merge the chunks together to make larger ones, and you can split them apart to make smaller ones.
Why does this, why even talk about it in this framework? Could we not just talk about it as Bitcoin and Satoshis? Like, what is the difference, I guess, between Bitcoin slash Sats and UTXOs?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think the reason why it matters is because, a lot of people, they look at their wallet and they see a balance, right? On that wallet, they say, okay, I own this many Satoshis. Okay. And that's not the full picture. The full picture is, well, what size chunks does this come in? Is it a bunch of tiny little dusty Satoshis,
Mm,
right? Or
mm,
is it one big giant chunk? And we'll talk about this kind of as we go on. But if it's a bunch of dusty small Satoshis, right? It's a bunch of small UTXOs, then that could be problematic in the future if fees get really high.
mm.
It costs, I mean, one thing to know, it costs the same amount to move a small UTXO as it costs to move a large UTXO. So, from a network perspective, it's going to cost you the same amount to move around a UTXO that's, 1,000 sats as it will
Mm.
cost you to move around a UTXO that's a billion sats, right?
Got it.
Yep. So there's really no difference from a fee perspective. And then that's, you just want to make sure you don't have tiny UTXOs because you're going to be paying a lot of fees to move them around.
Got it. So each UTXO, which is a chunk of Sats, basically,
Yep.
has to be moved in individually on the base layer. So each one would be
Yep.
subjected to fees. So if you have, as you said, a lot of fragmented or dusty UTXOs, then you're gonna be very fee inefficient, right? Should you try to move a lot of that at once.
Yep.
And I guess this is something we'll talk about later in the conversation. The idea of consolidating those UTXOs when fees are low, right? Like in the anticipation of
Yeah.
fees becoming much higher later. So you're really, I guess, sort of preparing your stash to be more fee efficient in the future.
Yeah. Exactly. That's exactly it. Yep.
Okay,
And fees right now are relatively low. So it's an important conversation to have, currently before they ramp back up
got it.
as the next wave of adoption comes in.
And what makes this different than, I mean, gold is different because, well, there's not fees every time you move physical gold, right? I mean, I guess there can be, but I guess how is it? We use gold as the analogy, like you can subdivide and
Hmm.
recombine gold just like you can with UTXOs, but it doesn't seem intuitive to me that the UTXO model applies to gold. So what's the difference there? Where does the analogy break down?
Um, I mean, I guess the analogy does break down because, maybe it actually, for gold, it costs more to move larger amounts, right? So
Oh, okay.
that's where the analogy might break down a bit. Although, if you're trying to send a little flake of gold, you're probably going to pay more in postage than the gold is worth, right?
Right.
And so, in that sense, if you have the ability to, you're probably going to want to melt down your flakes of gold into a larger chunk before you mail it off and pay off your
Hmm.
dets.
Got it.
The person might not accept your flakes of gold anyways, so
Yeah.
they might want it in a bar form. But yeah, I mean, the analogy is definitely not perfect, but I think it helps. Just thinking of a UTXO as a chunk of Bitcoin because that's
Got
really
it.
what it is.
So yeah, so the Bitcoin fees we're basically saying are driven more by the number of these UTXO chunks, whereas gold fees are going to be driven much more by weight, right? And
Yeah, yeah,
yeah, so in theory, if you had like you said the 500,000 Bitcoin UTXO, that's a massive quantity of purchasing power. I don't even know what that number is today in the billions, but you
yep,
could move that on chain today with a fee probably below $5, right?
yep,
Whereas if you tried to
exactly.
move that much gold, the weight of the gold, which scales with its purchasing power, also scales with its transmission cost or transaction cost. So if you tried to move
Yep,
billions of gold, you would need the armored trucks and the boats and the planes or whatever. Um,
yep, exactly.
but that doesn't apply to Bitcoin because Bitcoin's non-physical and digital.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
Interesting. Okay. So why is this UTXO model unique or interesting for money?
Yeah. So I think it's really interesting for money because it allows the users to have a full history of everything that's happened. And so not only do, the users who are running full archival nodes, right? Not only do they have the ability to know every single sized UTXO in existence currently, but they also have the complete history of every single UTXO that's ever been created since the beginning of Bitcoin. So, you might find it interesting if you're a little bit more analytical to go through the history and find these kind of interesting facts, like the one I shared earlier, like the largest chunk of Bitcoin that's ever existed.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, imagine if, just kind of bringing it back to gold. Imagine if you knew the largest chunk of gold that's ever existed in the universe, when it was made, where it is, like how big is it? I want to know that fact, but there's no way of knowing that with gold, right? Only, only God knows that if you believe in God. But us mere mortals could never know such a thing with certainty, at least. Um, with Bitcoin, you can. You just need to run Bitcoin, and then you have the whole history, and you can know from the beginning of Bitcoin every single chunk that's ever existed, where it's been, where it's gone, which ones have been combined together, which ones have been split up, and then the current state of where they all are now. So from a monetary perspective, that's very important because you actually know the current supply, and you can tally up all the chunks and make sure that we're never surpassing the promised 21 million cap.
So is this something like the analogy is you would be able to track every single of atom of gold that's ever been mined in the history of the human race, something like that, and where it's been and where it is currently?
Yeah, correct. Yep. And all the chunks that have been melted together. And you're not, well, okay, so let's clarify something. You're not tracking the Satoshis, right? That's something else, and we don't have to go there because I know it's a touchy subject. um, but what you're tracking is the UTXOs. So you're tracking the chunks of Bitcoin, right?
Okay.
The base layer protocol of Bitcoin doesn't track individual Satoshis. It only tracks kind of their coalesced chunks. And so what you would really be tracking from a gold perspective, using, staying with that analogy, is the chunks of gold, right? The pieces of gold, when they've been merged together, maybe when they've been split apart. But if you think about it, like when you melt two pieces of gold together, you don't really know which atoms came from which chunk, right?
Right.
Some of them might have gotten mixed together in the middle. Some might gone to the edges. Same thing with Bitcoin. There's no method or internal mechanism for tracking individual Satoshis when we're dealing with UTXOs. They're just values of Satoshis.
Got it. So if you trace all the UTXOs back to their point of origin, they're all mined, right? So they're coming out in chunks that are consistent with the block subsidy at that particular point in the halving schedule.
Yes. So that's a great point. So yeah, the origin of all Bitcoin UTXOs are from the Coinbase transactions, right? Which is the reward given to the miners. And typically that Coinbase transaction generates one UTXO. At least in the early days, a lot of the times, the miners would just take that reward as one brand new UTXO. And that would be the subsidy plus any fees that are given to the miner. So it's all added together into the brand new UTXO. And more recently, as mining pools have kind of gotten a little bit more sophisticated, some of them have started to split the Coinbase into multiple UTXOs, paying out kind of their top hashers in that point in time. So you can have kind of like a bunch of brand new UTXOs generated in a block, rewarded to the various miners who helped mine that block. But yeah, that's how new UTXOs are created.
Got it. And so you're talking about, I guess, Bitcoin basically affording users a complete knowledge of it's the history of its money and the movements of that money, at least again, not at a per sat basis, but on a per chunk basis, per UTXO basis. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? I mean, privacy concerns sort of come to mind, but obviously transparency seems to be useful. So, like, what are the trade-offs being made here in this kind of unique UTXO model?
That's exactly the trade-offs is we are sacrificing some aspects of privacy with full transparency, at
Mm,
least on the base layer. So
mhm,
remember, I mean, right now the conversation is kind of explicitly at a base layer level. Um, but if we're talking, about the base layer, yes, every single movement of Bitcoin is trackable and
mhm,
traceable.
mm,
And if you, let's say, consolidate, right, merge together a couple of UTXOs,
mhm,
then those histories are forever linked between those two chunks of Bitcoin,
mm,
right? Anybody who spins up a node in the future will see those two chunks got merged together. And whoever sent you either of those chunks in the past will
mm,
now see, oh, Wicked just merged together the chunk that I sent him with this other chunk. Isn't that interesting? I wonder where he got that one from, you know?
mhm, mhm,
So yeah, all those histories are transparent. Um, Now, if in the future enough of the Bitcoin users decide that privacy is something really important, that they want better tools for, then there are some things that we could do to, make our Bitcoin transactions more private. For example, sharing UTXOs. Um, I mean, when you use Lightning, for example, like all of
mhm,
that, all those transactions are done off chain and
mhm,
then aggregated back on chain when they're settled. But all that stuff, everything that we're doing off chain is, I mean, depending on kind of which layer you're doing it on, is totally private, right? It's
mm,
not known by the base layer. So you can have privacy in layers. But on the base layer, I think it is very important to keep things transparent so that you know that nobody's
mm,
inflating the supply. I mean, that's what makes Bitcoin so unique as a money is that
mm,
it has a fixed supply. Um, it's one that all of the users can check themselves. And the design of Bitcoin is such that this fixed supply is very likely to never be broken, right?
mm,
I don't know if any other alternative currency or, even gold, right? Like we don't know if we'll be able to manufacture gold with enough energy, right, in the future.
yeah.
If we devise some mechanism or just pulling it out of asteroids in the future, if it becomes um, worth it, right? And
Yeah.
so with Bitcoin, I mean, I think it's very important to have that assurance that there is no inflated supply, at least on the base layer.
So I'm hearing you correctly. On the base layer, we are trading off privacy, right? We're actually there's a lot of transparency at the base layer to assure a hard cap of 21 million Bitcoin. So I guess the trade-off to have fixed money supply, which makes it the perfect store of value, is you have to let everyone be able to verify that supply, which requires some loss of privacy. Is that correct?
Yeah, at least as it stands now. I mean,
Yeah.
there are some kind of out there interesting ideas as to how we could add privacy onto the base layer, but
Mhm.
as it stands currently, and probably as it will stand, or for the foreseeable future, that is
Mhm.
the trade-off. Yep.
So what are like privacy tools such as CoinJoin, coin mixers, etc.? What are they actually doing? Are they
Yeah. Yeah.
recycling UTXOs? Like what's going on with those?
Yeah. So what those are doing is it's basically the way that those work, kind of at a simple level, is you're taking a bunch of UTXOs from various participants, all the same size, and you're putting those together in a transaction as inputs, and then on the other side of the transaction, the outputs that are created, you have, the same number of UTXOs created on the other side with the same values. And
Mm.
so from a on-chain analytics perspective, you don't know which one on the input side goes to which one on the output side, right?
Mm.
It's like taking, it's like everyone has the same sized gold coin. You put them in a pile, and then everyone picks up a new one, and you don't
Mhm.
know, you know, who got which one and so you don't know, which one everyone started with, but you don't know which one everyone ended up with.
Got it. So you're breaking the tracing or the traceability of the individual UTXOs by grouping them together and then redistributing them.
Yep.
And is that problematic though, because they have to be the same size? So if someone has weird sized UTXOs, does that become difficult?
Well, you can break it up, right? So if you've got, like, let's say you enter a CoinJoin that requires, 1 million sat UTXO sizes,
Hmm.
you can enter it with, let's say you've got a 3 million sat UTXO, you can split it into three 1 million
Oh,
sat
okay. Okay.
UTXOs, right? Before you enter in.
So the 500,000 Bitcoin UTXO you mentioned would just chop it into a bazillion pieces and mix it like that.
Yeah, I mean, if they're interested in mixing it, I
Yeah.
think Mt. Gox has bigger problems to worry about than that. But
And so that would mean these privacy additions, or I guess privacy processes, I don't really know what to call them, privacy tools maybe, they're probabilistic, right? You're not getting an absolute privacy just by running through a coin join, right? So people run through several
yeah,
of these, maybe
yeah.
switching back and forth to try to increase their level of privacy.
Hmm. Yep. Yeah, you can mix them, multiple times, and that increases your kind of probabilistic privacy
Hmm.
exponentially the more mixes you have. And again, these are like base layer solutions, which
Hmm.
some people use, but they're not super popular. They've got some fees associated with them, which are relatively high for a lot of people. So just from a user demand perspective, I think the demand isn't super high for those types of tools at the
Hmm.
moment. What will be interesting, in my opinion, is when you have um, better privacy providing second layers. So things like Fedimints or different eCash, Chaumian eCash
Hmm.
mints, which are second layers. And what you're doing with those types of protocols is you're getting perfect privacy for your eCash IOU, right? And everyone's Bitcoin is being sent to a single address. They're all sharing one address with a bunch of different chunks, a bunch of UTXOs sent to it. And the mint is then giving you these, super private eCash tokens, which you can do whatever you want with while you're in the mint. You can pay
Hmm.
Lightning invoices with them. You can swap them around with other mint users. And then when you're ready to peg back out, you tell the mint, hey, here are all my leftover eCash notes, and maybe here's a few extra that I got.
Hmm.
And the mint doesn't know any of the history associated with those while you were in there. Doesn't know if you were a new participant, an older one. Doesn't know where those different notes have been or who gave them to you, or if you just were holding them yourself the whole time. And then, if they are a good trusted mint, asterisk, trust your mint, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Then they'll give you the Bitcoin back and you'll get it out of that pool of shared UTXOs. And so, from a privacy perspective, if you have a mint with, let's say hundreds of users or even thousands, then you'll be hiding in a very large crowd, and it's going to be nearly impossible at that point to trace the people that went in with the people that came out, especially if you're going in and out with different amounts of Bitcoin.
Got it. Okay.
So I'm excited for those to kind of take off. I think this cycle, in the same way that Lightning kind of took off last cycle, right? You
Yeah.
saw the advent of these Lightning apps kind of, flourish.
Yeah.
I think we'll start seeing the same type of flourishing of eCash mint layers and applications being built this cycle.
If you are a business owner or manager, you should know these three numbers: 36,000, 25, and 1. 36,000 is the number of businesses that have upgraded to NetSuite by Oracle. NetSuite is the #1 cloud financial system, which allows you to streamline accounting, financial management, human resources, and more. NetSuite turns 25 years old this year. That's 25 years of helping businesses do more with less, close their books in days rather than weeks, and to drive down cost. And finally, 1, because your business is one of a kind. So with NetSuite, you get a customized solution for all your key performance indicators in one efficient system with one source of truth. NetSuite is everything you need all in one place. Right now, you can download NetSuite's popular KPI checklist designed to give you consistently excellent performance absolutely free at netsuite.com/whatismoney. That's netsuite.com/whatismoney to get your free KPI checklist. Again, netsuite.com/whatismoney.
We want you to join us for 2 days of discussions and debate, which is all happening at the inaugural Dissident Dialogues 2024.
This incredible event will take place in Brooklyn on May the 3rd and 4th. You'll be joining leading thinkers such as Richard Dawkins, Steven Pinker, Ayaan Hirsi Ali, John McWhorter, Aisha Akambi, Michael Schellenberger, Mary Harrington, Chris Williamson, Winston Marshall, Konstantin Kisin, Francis Foster, and more.
Hang on a second, since when have you ever been a serious thinker?
I love thinking. It's my favourite hobby. Sometimes, of an evening, it's all I do. Think.
Moving swiftly on, we want you to join us for a gathering where everyone is part of the conversation. Conservatives, progressives, atheists, theists, left, right, and everything in between.
Dissident Dialogues presents a rare opportunity to immerse yourself in a conversation with the most influential thinkers of our time.
We'll tackle important topics relating to religion, science, politics, and culture. If you're driven by intellectual honesty, curiosity, and a desire for the truth, Dissident Dialogues is the place for you.
It's not just an event, it's the beginning of an intellectual journey, and we want you to come along for the ride. I like rides.
Dissident Dialogues is a place for dangerous ideas. Buy your tickets now at dissidentdialogues.org and be part of the conversation.
Forget multivitamins and other supplements. Animal organs are the most nutrient-dense foods on the planet. You can get 100 times more nutrients from organs than you can from muscle meats. But the problem with eating organs is that they are difficult to find in stores, they are difficult to prepare, and even when they are prepared well, they often don't taste great. Thankfully, Heart and Soil Supplements has made consuming organ meats so much easier by providing powderized organs in capsule form. Organ meats include everything your body needs to thrive: vitamins, minerals, peptides, proteins, and growth factors. This is why organ meats were the most prized foods for our ancestors. Fortunately for us, Heart and Soil makes these treasured foods easily accessible. So go to heartandsoil.co today and use discount code BREEDLOVE to get started on your journey to optimal health and vitality. Again, that's heartandsoil.co, discount code BREEDLOVE. So then why, I guess this is the meat of the conversation, why is it important for people to learn to manage their their own UTXOs? Sounds like almost a Bitcoiner hygiene type thing.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and it really is, right? And I think the caveat here is like, it's going to depend on the user, right? So if you're an OG or you've got a ton of Bitcoin, then it's not as applicable to you, at least one aspect of it. And we'll kind of break this down in a second, right? But if you're a newer participant and you've got a smaller amount of Bitcoin, then you might want to pay a little bit more attention. So there's really two reasons, and we've kind of touched on them already, but we can dive into them now. So the first is privacy, right? So that's what we were just talking about before. In the context of privacy, you want to, there's two aspects. The first is you want to make sure you're using the right sized chunk of Bitcoin for, the right context. So if you're buying something small or that's not very expensive, like a dinner, right? You're going out to dinner. The restaurant owner is super cool and he accepts Bitcoin. So you're like, all right, I'll pay in Bitcoin. But then he's like, oh, my Lightning node isn't working. I only accept on chain right now.
Mm-hmm.
So you want to make sure you pay him with the right size chunk. Maybe the bill is going to cost like 100,000 sats. And without thinking about it, you mistakenly pay with like a 10 million sat chunk.
Mm-hmm.
The restaurant owner can see that now, right? They're going to get their notification. All right, Wicked just paid the bill. Oh, that's interesting. He just paid the bill with, a 10 million sat chunk. This guy's freaking rich. I'm going to phone up my friends and have him jumped around the corner when he goes back to his car. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Like there's some privacy and some security concerns with using chunks that are too big, right? Especially when you're paying for things in person. So that can be one aspect of the privacy. The other aspect is mixing together histories of Bitcoin that you don't want to be tied together forever. So for example, let's say you've been stacking as much Bitcoin as you can, you withdraw it from the exchange, or most of your chunks are KYC'd, right? Let's say you've also got a couple of chunks that are no KYC. Maybe you bought them off of BISC or HODL HODL, and or you did some work and you got paid peer to peer, and you don't want those histories to be mixed together because you kind of want to keep that stash secret, and you don't want people knowing of it who don't need to know about it. If you mistakenly pay a bill in the future, mixing your KYC UTXOs with your no KYC UTXOs, those histories are linked forever. And, if someone ever comes knocking on your door in the future asking you how much Bitcoin you've got, now they're going to know, well, he spent from that UTXO that wasn't in our registered list of whitelisted list of all the UTXOs we thought he owned. So he probably has some other secret Bitcoin too, right? So keeping things private from that perspective as well is important.
So
now,
sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, there are there's some really useful tools that you can use for labeling your UTXOs. So just from a user perspective, if you're wondering like, well, how the hell am I going to, keep track of all my chunks of Bitcoin, right? What applications allow me to do that? Luckily, a lot of wallet applications are starting to take this a lot more seriously. So you've got wallets like Sparrow Wallet if you're on desktop, or Nunchuck Wallet if you're on mobile, right? There's a few others as well. But yeah, I mean, these wallets allow you to label your individual UTXOs. So you can start to give them, particular labels. Maybe you want to designate this one as no KYC and this one as, KYC coming from, Cash App or whatever exchange you use. And then you can start to kind of group these together with their labels and make sure never to mix them if that's something you care about.
So if you have commingled UTXO histories that you didn't intend to, maybe it's KYC, no KYC, for instance, is that something you can undo with CoinJoins and mixers, or does that just basically cleanse the entire? If you entangle their histories, you then need to mix both UTXOs to break the linkages to determine for people to see where those UTXOs came from looking backwards.
Yeah, so if you've mixed UTXOs together that you didn't want to, or you just kind of weren't paying attention, and then now you're learning about this for the first time, so now you're thinking, oh shit, maybe I mixed together some I didn't mean to. The answer is it's kind of too late, right? Because let's say the government comes knocking and says, hey, we know you have this much Bitcoin from your exchange. We also know that, you mixed together a couple of them with this other Bitcoin, which, maybe it was no KYC to start with, but now we know now we know you have it, right? Or at the very least, we know that you've had it in the past. They're probably going to require proof. Like if you say, oh, I spent it, right? Oh, I CoinJoined it and then I spent it on the other side. they're going to say, okay, prove it. Right. So like coin joining it doesn't erase the history. It only obfuscates the future spending. And if you have a tyrannical government who doesn't care about, what you're saying, they want proof and evidence, right? Guilty until proven innocent.
Right.
Then you're going to need a good paper trail even after a coin join to prove to them that you don't have that Bitcoin anymore, right?
So this is where the hygiene is so important, because
Yeah,
ideally you need to just never get that
never mix.
commingling mess in the first place.
Yep.
So if you have non KYC Bitcoin, ideally it would never touch or be commingled historically with KYC Bitcoin.
Yep.
And
And
if it,
one really easy way to do that is just to have separate wallets.
yeah,
So if you have a separate no KYC wallet, then there's virtually no chance it will ever, get mixed together with your KYC, because you'll probably spend them separately from those wallets. So that's one really easy way to do it. If you only want to manage one single wallet, then you're going to have good label practices and make sure
yeah.
that you're labeling all of them.
So on the topic of choosing the right UTXO for the right occasion, where you're saying like, oh, you're paying for dinner, it's 100,000 sats. You pay with a 10 million sat UTXO, you get 9.9 million change. That lets the vendor that you paid know you have a ton of sats and gives them an incentive to mug you or whatever. Is that just a matter of choosing the right, when you say the right UTXO for the right occasion, is it just like the bill is 100K, you need to spend something around that amount? Is that the only aspect of that?
Yep. I mean, I'd say that's the main aspect.
Hmm.
Yeah, like, probably choosing a UTXO that's similar in size, or if it's the perfect size, then that's even better, right?
Mm,
Because then you get no change back,
right.
and you'll actually you'll save on fees in that matter too. Um, so yeah, I mean, if you can pick a perfectly sized UTXO to pay your bill, then that's awesome. Otherwise, you probably want to pick one that's relatively similar
Mm.
in size
So it's
or
just like
value.
physical cash in a way. Ideally you want to pay with perfect change.
Yeah, yeah, and you don't
Right.
want to pay, the you don't want to pay the corner store with uh, $1,000 bill, right? Assuming
Right.
that we get one of those in the near
Sure.
future
Yeah.
for a
Right.
$1 candy bar.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Where do where does the proverbial Bitcoin voting accident play into all this? You're talking about a tyrannical government. Like even if you obfuscated your UTXO history through coin joins or mixers or whatever, they would still want to see proof, right? Like, oh, well, where did you actually spend the Bitcoin? Where does the boating accident, the boating accident trope play into this? If the guy's like, ah, I had a boating accident, and they're all gone. Like,
Yeah,
how does that fit in?
um, that's a good question. I mean, I think it is kind of a meme, and people say it jokingly. It would be very interesting to see how many people actually fold under any sort of pressure, because again, with a tyrannical government, I don't think they're going to believe you at face value when you
Hmm.
say, no, I really lost the seed phrase. I don't have access to that Bitcoin anymore. They're going to look through your histories and say, oh, well, looks like you just moved it a couple days ago. Are you sure about that? Right.
Mm.
Um, so yeah, I mean, if
Well,
your
they
plan
wouldn't be
is
able if
to,
you had obfuscated it though and broken it, you broke the traceability. They wouldn't be able to do that, right? They would say, "Oh, you moved it
that's true.
whatever
That's
so many
true.
years ago prior to the obfuscation."
Yeah, that's a good point. So if you coin joined it and, it's not super obvious, the outputs that you got from that coin join, then yeah, you're right. You could maybe get some leeway by doing that.
Mm.
Um, Now that being said, I mean, you remember the who was the couple who stole a bunch of Bitcoin from that exchange and they got caught? I think it was last cycle with like a couple $1 billion worth of Bitcoin. I forget their name. Anyway, yeah, some exchange hack, and they
Hmm.
stole.
It was Quadriga,
At the
the
time,
Canadian thing.
I forget. But anyways, the point is, they had coin joined that Bitcoin,
Hmm.
right? Now, of course, it's a much larger amount, and so the stakes are a lot higher. And also, it's probably a lot easier to suss out which coins ended up being theirs on the other side,
Hmm.
just because you're dealing with larger amounts. But the government was able to trace it even with the coin joins. So there's It's not perfect by any means, right? And there is some, I mean, like you said, it's probabilistic. So there's some probability that they'd be able to identify, maybe what coins you ended up with, especially if like the other people in that CoinJoin spent their coins and it was obvious, that, oh, well, yeah, that was Wicked who spent that coin because, he spent it at the corner store or whatever. I don't know. Right. There's different ways they could probably analyze that if they were really motivated.
How did they trace it? So did they just not CoinJoin sufficiently? Like, how did the privacy tool not work? What was the story there?
I would imagine that in their case, it was just such a large amount of Bitcoin that it probably made it a lot easier. Because, I mean, not very many people are using CoinJoins. We always wish it was more people using them, but because the crowd that you're hiding in is relatively small, I think if you're a target, right, if you're like a high profile target, then they're going to throw a lot of resources at you to try to figure out where those Bitcoin ended up, and even if they have to trace, I don't know, thousands of addresses that came out as all those outputs from the CoinJoins. I mean, that's not a super difficult thing to do for a three-letter agency, just to watch those addresses and then wait for a mistake to be made, right?
Gotcha.
So now with the Fedimints and like those types of things, there's no way there's no way they could trace them, right? It's Chaumian E-Cash. It's perfectly private for all intents and purposes.
Can you expand on that? Chaumian E-Cash, what that actually means for Bitcoin?
Yeah. So it's a trusted second layer solution, which gives the users nearly perfect privacy. I mean, I would say for all intents and purposes, perfect privacy, and very low friction, low fee payments. Okay. Do you know much about Chaumian E-Cash? Are you aware of
no. Basically, what you said is about the extent of my knowledge. Is it a replacement then or an alternative to Lightning Network? Because Lightning Network was supposed to provide some of those benefits as well.
Definitely not a replacement, because it requires a lot of trust, right? You have to trust your mint guardians completely, right? They could rug you at any point, and so in this instance, you're trading off trust for privacy. And so there's that trade-off there. But yeah, I mean, without getting too much into like how it actually works, the point is that with a mint that has enough users, you could hide in a very large crowd, and there would basically be no way that you could trace the Bitcoin going in and the Bitcoin coming out. You would have no way of knowing kind of, what anyone did while they were in the mint. And then who's exiting at any point. It's really difficult, much more difficult to trace that type of activity than CoinJoin activity, because CoinJoining, everything is still on chain. So you still see all the different UTXOs that are created, and you can kind of, trace that a little bit easier. But with a mint, someone could feasibly stay inside the mint for a very long time and do all of their spending privately internally, and then there's no chance in hell that they'll be traced. So I don't know. It's an interesting thing. Yeah. Not it doesn't really have much to do with UTXOs, but just as a side topic.
Over the past 9 years, I've been going through a pretty serious struggle with my personal health. It started with a sharp pain and stiffness in my hip after a lifting injury, which I later learned was related to some pretty extensive inflammation in my gut. Then I developed an autoimmune issue, and soon I was having joint pain all over, skin irritations, and all kinds of digestive issues. I visited many doctors trying to figure out what was wrong, but none of them were able to help me fix any of my issues. I eventually started to see an energy healer with whom I had some limited success, but it wasn't until I started working with the biohacker Anthony DiClementi last year that I was finally able to start making real progress on my healing journey. Anthony spent a lot of time with me learning about my specific situation and worked with me to adapt a custom health plan to address my needs. Anthony has served as a personal biohacker for celebrities, billionaires, and professional athletes all over the world. Besides helping people like me overcome health issues, Anthony and his world-class medical team also help guys that just want to optimize their cognitive performance, guys that want to pack on some muscle, and guys that just want to get shredded. Anthony keeps a tight book of business and is selective about the clients he brings on. To apply for Anthony's biohacking services, text Breedlove to 847-943-7221. Again, to apply for Anthony's biohacking services, just text Breedlove to 847-943-7221. Thanks to my friends at Swan Bitcoin for supporting the show. Swan sponsored the Sailor series, and I appreciate their support from the very beginning of the What is Money show, and I'm happy to welcome them back. Swan has grown a lot since then. They've built a full-service Bitcoin-centric financial services company with several different offerings. With the Swan app, you can set up instant and recurring Bitcoin buys, and with this, you can get started at swan.com/breedlove. Swan also enables clients in the US to hold Bitcoin directly in an IRA account, so you can hold Bitcoin in a tax-advantaged way. Get started at swan.com/IRA. If you're looking to buy more than $100,000 worth of Bitcoin, check out Swan Private. You'll get concierge support for buy execution, retirement accounts, inheritance and estate planning, and access to exclusive events, research, and other content. Get started at swan.com/private. Swan Institutional provides financial services to institutions, including Bitcoin-backed lending, asset management, principal investments, Bitcoin services for financial advisors, and Bitcoin mining operations. For those new to Bitcoin, I recommend checking out Swan's Welcome to Bitcoin course at swan.com/welcome. So go to swan.com/breedlove today to get started on your Bitcoin buying journey. Are you sick of being robbed by politicians through inflation and endless money printing? If so, you need to be at Bitcoin 2024 in Nashville, Tennessee on July 25th through 27th. As the largest Bitcoin and Fintech conference in the world, Bitcoin 2024 stands as a beacon of monetary freedom, a glimmer of hope amongst a darkening macroeconomic backdrop. Top speakers, companies, and thought leaders from across the industry will convene in Nashville to look ahead to the next year and beyond. I will be there, and Bitcoin conferences like this have become my favorite place to socialize since becoming a Bitcoiner. Ticket prices will increase soon. Get your tickets now and secure your spot at this game-changing event. So go to b.tc/conference and use discount code BREEDLOVE to sign up for the Bitcoin 2024 conference. Again, that's b.tc/conference, discount code BREEDLOVE. Okay, so let's see. Any other questions about that? Oh, I guess the labeling thing, one more time. If you have labeled UTXOs, that's just you're basically creating a data tag, right? You're just tagging it with whatever you want to tag it as.
Yep.
So that just
So different wallets
helps you manage your own hygiene better, but it doesn't change anything actually about the UTXOs.
Correct. Yeah, that's all external to Bitcoin. So it's not like it's marking the UTXO on chain or anything like that. It's just a labeling on the wallet that you're using. So, if you're using Sparrow wallet, which, a lot of people have started using on desktop, by the way, if you're going to use that, make sure it's the desktop version because all the mobile versions are scams. So Sparrow wallet on desktop, it just has a label field. So you can kind of type in whatever you want in that field. If you're using Nunchuck wallet on mobile device, they have tags. And so you can kind of like make a tag, right? You can have like a no KYC tag, a Strike tag, a Cash App tag, my friend Joe tag, right? So you can kind of start to make these separate tagging categories. But yeah, good hygiene. Just keeping track of where they came from.
I'm just trying to think of like an extreme example here. If someone was like fully KYC'd and they're like, I don't want to be, I want to have zero KYC'd Bitcoin. Does that mean they need to go through, because you already said earlier, I mean, the boating accident thing might work. You could obfuscate it historically, but it's still kind of probabilistic. If you wanted absolute assurance, would that be a process of unwinding your Bitcoin, your KYC Bitcoin stack, and then going out and buying all non KYC Bitcoin? Would that be the highest degree of assurance?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, and full transparency here, this is something I'm not terribly worried about.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I mean, I think most of us want to probably use our Bitcoin for, some life-changing purchases in the future. And if you're going to be doing that, you better have a paper trail of how you got that Bitcoin. For
Mm-hmm.
example, if you're buying a house or a car, uh, the bank ain't going to accept that Bitcoin unless, they know it was acquired legitimately,
Mm-hmm.
right? So if you try to obfuscate it, or like if you, try to claim that you got it, not too long ago, so you're taking a smaller tax hit or whatever, um, you're going to have people up your ass with a magnifying glass asking you questions. So you want to make sure like if that's your plan, right? If your plan is to use Bitcoin as money that you can save for a future where you improve your life, you're probably going to want to work within the framework of your current, government, as
Yeah.
shitty as that is. But that's just the world we live in. So, for me, like I use Bitcoin as my money. I think it's the best money in the world. It's money you can save, and I plan to spend some of it in the future. And so, when I do that, I don't really care if it's KYC'd. As a matter of fact, it being KYC'd probably makes it easier to spend, anyways.
I see.
Now, if you live in an area, and obviously speaking from a place of privilege because I'm in the US, right? If you live in an area where you're a little bit more scared about your government and you are afraid that they might come after you, maybe you've got a decent amount of Bitcoin, and it's all KYC'd. Yeah, you might want to consider starting a side stack of no KYC Bitcoin, or maybe even, like you said, starting to um, maybe sell some of that KYC Bitcoin back on the exchange for fiat, and then taking that fiat and buying no KYC, just so you have a little bit more privacy from your
Mm.
tyrannical government. Um, but hopefully that's not too much of an issue moving forward. I'm hoping that most governments kind of just dissolve peacefully
Right. Right.
as
Right. Right.
as Bitcoin, gets more and more popular. But we'll see. I mean, I guess,
Yeah. So yeah,
it's going to
the
depend where you are.
up your ass with a magnifying glass. Um, I guess governments, the reason they're able to do that, and you mentioned earlier too, like a three-letter agency monitoring thousands of addresses. The reason they're able to bring so many resources to bear is largely because of the money printer, right? So
Yep,
I guess you would
exactly.
expect in the longest scope of Bitcoin's monetization that up your ass with a magnifying glass threat sort of diminishes over time as Bitcoin monetizes, and then, basically diminishes state revenue, right? When you diminish state revenue, you
Mhm.
diminish their ability to bring resources to bear toward
Yep.
ends such as that. Um, but that's sort of like that's a reality that doesn't exist yet. So like in the meantime, if you're looking to accumulate and spend your Bitcoin in the next, I don't know, so many years, whatever the short to medium term is,
Yeah. Let's say a
KYC
decade or two.
Bitcoin is actually perhaps better because it's already sort of blessed, right, by the state in a way. It's like you've acquired it under your identity, presumably you paid tax on it, and it's good to go. Whereas if
Yeah.
you have
Yep.
this fully no non KYC Bitcoin, they're going to ask questions. So that seems like kind of a
Yep.
balancing act people need to consider, and even in their own personal UTXO hygiene protocol.
Yeah. Yep. I'd say so. And, I have a couple friends on Twitter who, claim to have mined earlier blocks. And obviously when you mine a Bitcoin, sorry, when you mine Bitcoin, it's no KYC, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so in their case, they've they've said that they just basically gave that Bitcoin a cost basis of 0 and paid the full amount of taxes that they could on it when they went out and spent it, just so that if they ever do get the magnifying glass, the government's probably going to owe them some money. It's like they've basically paid the max on it already. And so, yeah, I mean, there's, it's like if all you have is no KYC Bitcoin because maybe you were early or whatever, then it's not like it's worthless. I mean, obviously it's one Bitcoin's one Bitcoin. It's worth as much as anybody's willing to pay for a Bitcoin. I'll purchase a Bitcoin. I don't care where it's been, right? It's all fungible to me. But if you're worried about the tax man, there are things you can do to kind of guarantee you're not going to get slapped on the wrist in the future.
Yeah, that's another good point. I mean, you're saying here basically these UTXOs are non-fungible, right? To some extent. That if you could trace one that, I don't know, came from some illicit organization or whatever that was blacklisted by a government versus one that was, bought on a KYC'd exchange by a legitimate citizen, presumably the one UTXO, the latter would be less risky than the former. Is that correct?
Yeah. I mean, assuming you're trying to get back on the fiat rails, right?
Right.
I'll work for Bitcoin. I don't care where it's come from, right? I don't care if you got it from a terrorist. I'll mow your lawn for Bitcoin. You know what I'm saying? Like, so P2P, I don't think it really matters. But going back to the traditional rails, that's where things get a little dicey.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's one of those things. Well, like gold, right? Gold's pretty damn fungible, but Bitcoin with its UTXO model has sounds like a little bit less actually fungibility. But maybe that gets better, I guess, with the Chaumian E-Cash and the Fedimints and all this other tech stack. Maybe over time it becomes much more fungible. But it seems like if you're purely operating on the base layer, there's definitely some a fungibility trade-off, at least for that hard cap supply.
Yeah, and again, I think the fungibility trade-off is primarily kind of bottlenecked by going back to the traditional fiat rails. And so if you're planning on staying in Bitcoin forever and you're just going to hodl it until you can spend it directly, right? You can buy your house directly with Bitcoin, or you can pay people directly with Bitcoin. Then I don't think it's really going to matter, right? I mean, like I said, I personally don't care where the Bitcoins come from. I'll take it. I don't care if I get some Bitcoin and then all of a sudden it's blacklisted. All right, I'll just hodl it until it's not blacklisted, because I think I can hodl it longer than the government can stay solvent. So,
move somewhere where it's not blacklisted.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there you go.
All right, so that's the privacy perspective on why it's important to learn how to manage your own UTXOs. What about the fee management perspective?
Yeah, so I think this is the more important. Well, I shouldn't say more important, because the privacy part's obviously very important, but most people are just hodling their Bitcoin, so they're not really worried about spending any of it, right? They're not going to be spending their Bitcoin going out for dinner, so they don't care about the privacy part like that. But if all you're doing is hodling Bitcoin, then that means that you're going to be eventually spending it in the far off future. And by then, fees may have risen much, much higher than they are now. So we said earlier, right, it costs the same amount to spend a small UTXO as it costs to spend a large one. And if fees are really, really high, because network activity is booming in a hyper Bitcoinized future, then your tiny little chunks of Bitcoin, right, that maybe you've been like daily DCAing, $5 a day, and every single time you DCA, you withdraw it on chain. Now you've got a bunch of tiny little chunks, right, that you've accumulated over the past cycle. Those tiny little chunks might end up costing more to move than they're worth, effectively making them worthless, right? I mean, it's like, again, like if you had a flake of gold and you wanted to spend your flake of gold, but then the postage costs more than the flake, you're not going to spend it, right? Because you're going to actually end up paying more in postage than the gold's worth.
Right. Yeah. So when you get upside down and the transaction fee is higher than the quantity or purchasing power of money you're sending,
Yeah.
the cost of the
Then
cost of the transaction is higher than the purchasing power of the money you're sending. It's like, well, silly, right? You're not going to send a $1 wire and pay a $25 wire fee, for instance.
exactly. Yeah. Yep. And so, yeah, that can be a concern in a high fee future, which, I mean, we can kind of just assume that that's going to happen, right? Because Bitcoin as a network actually requires that to happen. So if Bitcoin succeeds, there needs to be high fees to continue paying the miners as the
Right.
subsidy goes to zero. So we're all operating under a pretense that fees will take over the block reward in the future, meaning it's going to get expensive to use the base layer moving forward, kind of as we reach full saturation of base layer users. So, that should always be your base case assumption. It's going to get very expensive to use the base layer. Currently, I think we're at like a fee rate of 10 Satoshis per V byte. So, right, the fee rate that you're quoted on the base layer, it's weighted by how many virtual bytes of data your transaction takes up. So the more UTXOs that you're using as inputs, right? If you have to select a bunch of UTXOs and add them all together to pay your bill, that's going to require more data. And so the fee rate will multiply by that amount of data, and then you'll get your overall fee. So yeah, we're at a fee rate of around 10 sats per V byte. I wouldn't be surprised if that, ratchets up to 100 or 1,000 in the future. And so, what might be a reasonably spendable UTXO today could become unspendable in the future, or, like best case scenario, like maybe it'll still be spendable, but you'll spend, 10% of the value in fees every time you want to move it around or something. So you generally just want to make sure your UTXOs are kind of a little bit chunkier, especially when fees get low. That's kind of the time to clean up shop, merge together your smaller UTXOs. Of course, considering your privacy, so don't merge together your no KYC with your KYC, right? But if you got a bunch of smaller ones from, with exchange withdrawals or whatever, consider consolidating those when fees are low in order to save on fees in the future when they get high.
Got it. Okay, well, that makes a lot of sense for Bitcoin to continue monetizing. Well, the block subsidy goes down, so fees need to go up.
Yep.
So it is in your interest to get ahead of that by consolidating your UTXOs and otherwise maintaining amounts large enough so you don't get priced out of operating at the base layer. And I guess you should also be mindful of tagging, having the right UTXO sizes for the right occasions, based on your anticipated spending, I guess. And then being mindful of the UTXOs and their histories, right? Again, back to tagging, but obviously tagging is not actually doing anything other than giving you sort of an additional external accounting feature.
Yep.
So yeah, there's a lot that goes into this hygiene process.
Yeah, it's funny because it's like I feel like I kind of started paying a lot more attention to Bitcoin last cycle, right? And when I came in, to Twitter and started seeing everything everyone was saying, it was very much like not your keys, not your coins, be your own bank, right? These ideas where it's like, kind of these very simplified ways to be a Bitcoiner. But the truth is, it's actually kind of complicated to be your own bank, especially if you want to make sure that, you're doing it in a sustainable way. And so, it's like, I don't want to, I kind of want to stop underselling just how kind of complicated it is to be your own bank. It is
Right.
really like, if you want to be a base layer native, you gotta kind of up your game in terms of your UTXO management. A pretty important aspect of being a Bitcoiner for
Yeah.
sure.
Oh, that's a great point. With great power comes great responsibility, and being your own
Yeah,
bank is pretty powerful.
it is. Yeah.
Um, any, I guess, closing thoughts, or where should people go to learn more about this if they're interested?
Yeah. So I mean, there's all sorts of there's a lot of good material on UTXO management. If you search Bitcoin UTXO management, I think there's all sorts of articles. A lot of them came out recently during the more recent fee spike, right? People started paying a lot more attention to it because they realized, oh shit, it's going to get really expensive to use Bitcoin pretty soon. So I think, like River has a really good UTXO management article. So you can search that one. I try to make some videos. I have a tutorial on how to actually do UTXO management. I've got one for Nunchuck, as well as one for Spiral Wallet, using the cold card. So you can check out my YouTube channel if you want to see some of those more hands-on tutorials. And then I'm always talking about it on Twitter, right? I'm just kind of banging the table as often as I can without annoying too many of my followers on Twitter. So go ahead and follow me there, and you can ask me any questions you want if you've got any. But yeah, I'd say
Awesome.
those are some good resources.
Awesome. Well, we'll link to your stuff in the show notes. And Wicked, thank you for a great educational conversation.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man. Thanks for bringing UTXO management to light. I hope your listeners, clean up their UTXOs soon before fees get super high, because it's coming.
Yes, it is. All right, man. Thank you again.
All right. Thanks, man.